Most people don't wake up one day and be like, you know what? I think today I want to shoot up a school. No, these people have either dealt with either bullying or they were abused. It could go down the list. They were dirt poor, and there's just so many different levels. So it's hard to just say, well, they're a monster. I mean, look at half of the serial killers, okay? They were all either molested, neglected, or abused. Damn near almost all of them. There's just a very few that may not fit that mold. So for the most part, people do not just wake up and decide to do these things. It's a progression. And a lot of times it starts out with fantasies. And once you start having these fantasies, that's when you really, you need to go and talk to somebody so you can start to rewire it. But that is something that I've really learned throughout all the research that I've been doing.
That's Tiffanie Richards, a survivor and an advocate and the host of the True Crime Connections podcast, a podcast that's about so much more than true crime. I'm Jason Blair, and this is the Silver Linings Handbook podcast. Tiffanie Richards was born in southern New Jersey and then moved to Florida in 1990 with her mother. After realizing that she was a product of generational abuse, a form of abuse that crosses generational family lines and occurs when one family member takes the trauma that they've experienced and passes it along to another family member. Tiffanie became obsessed with true crime shows decades before she started her podcast and has always had an interest in forensic scientists and had dreamed of being a private investigator. Over the years, Tiffanie says, she observed so many cases that it became clear to her that they had a number of things in common. She could relate to them, and they often involved abuse, mental health challenges, domestic violence, toxic relationships, intergenerational trauma, and generational abuse. She's noticed that there were differences in the challenges of people based on heritage, race, sexual orientation, and socioeconomic conditions. Being a survivor herself, Tiffanie saw the importance of helping educate people on the risks, the rewards of healing, leaving, letting go, and moving on. The power of taking your own pain and using it to create a safe place for others to heal and learn, and finding a path to a healthier way of living. So, unlike many true crime podcasts, Tiffani's advocacy is from the lens of a survivor breaking the cycle that leads to both violence and other forms of trauma. Tiffani's podcast started as Crime Over Cocktails. It started out as a true crime podcast and became something so much more. It's really about, in my mind, connections and kindness, boundaries and resilience, reclaiming your voice, whether you're a victim or a perpetrator, and hearing the voices of so many others who have walked in your shoes and found a better way. In many ways, Tiffanie is someone who should be looked at through the lens of an advocate and through her own survival. On her journey, Tiffanie talks about how she was a witness to her own transformation, from what she calls a, quote, deflated soul, to what she believes now is, quote, an awe-inspiring force. Tiffanie notes that healing isn't passive and that instead one has to be intentional to grow. Today, in an episode filled with as many tears as it is laughter, we're going to talk about trauma and stigma, victims and abusers, the danger of flattening people into caricatures, healing and advocacy, and the value of that learning, that leaving, and that letting go. I just wanted to thank you for coming on the podcast and just mention I have had the pleasure over the last few, I don't know, has it been weeks? It's probably more than weeks, of catching a number of your episodes. And I was just really struck in your episodes by things like your vulnerability, the assortment of topics that you cover. I know your podcast has the name True Crime in it, but I feel like it's you really capture something deeper about life, that whether it has to do with crime or it has to do with just any kind of suffering, that's super powerful. And it's really interesting. So like the emotion I walked away with is I walked away from your episodes just feeling a little bit safer in the world, and I really enjoyed that. So I'm thrilled to have you on, and I you know just wanted to thank you for joining.
Well, hello, Jason, and thank you so much. That really means a lot to me. You hope sometimes that what you're doing comes across the way that you want it to, and you don't always know if it is.
It's very funny. After every episode, I'm like, I don't know if that really worked the way that I wanted to do. I feel like as the person on our side of the chair, we're often the worst judge of that.
Oh my God, we're the worst. Are you kidding me?
Right.
Seriously. But that's kind of why I put true crime connections, because all these things, they really are connected. Like,
Mm,
it's time that we make that connection between generational trauma, childhood trauma, and crime and domestic abuse, sexual abuse. There really is a connection there.
mm. It's really interesting because one of the things in thinking about all the different things that you mentioned, domestic violence, sexual violence, like the mental health things, these are all the things that do lead to crime that we don't often talk about, right? Like if I were in a true crime discussion forum talking about any case, pick a case right now, we'd be talking about whether the person was a psychopath or not a psychopath, or whether they were a narcissist or a narcissist. But we're not really capturing the deeper part, like what leads to it sometimes.
Absolutely. And that's where my podcast took a turn, because I wasn't always true crime connections. So, doing all these stories, I couldn't tell you how many stories started off with, well, they had a really rough childhood, or this happened to them when they were young, and pretty much look at them now. And it just clicked. It made sense. You can
Which
totally see how these people kind of end up where they are. Now, one thing I do want to say though is, just because you've had a shitty childhood does not give you the right to hurt other people, but it makes sense why you might.
Yeah, and I think it probably applies in both directions, because I think people don't like to think about, like, we like our victims pure, and we like our victims to in our minds be victimized based on nothing they've done, right? But like we all make different choices, and I think both for victims and perpetrators, a lot of these issues around abuse, violence, the cycle of abuse, like I think of some of my friends who've had the toughest times getting out of abusive relationships. Sometimes it's because they've been accustomed to it, right? Their life experience has made them accustomed. So I think there's something about the connection both ways.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I am actually a product of generational trauma, and it landed me into abusive relationships. I kept attracting the same kind of person, not only in relationships, but friends. I had friends that treated me like shit. It's just, it's what you attract, because that's pretty much what you know. It's what you're used to. And you don't realize that that's not really love. To you, that's love, because that's what happened.
There's this concept, like in psychology, where they talk about this notion of comfortable pain, right? That there's a certain kind of pain that you can go through that on the outside it looks like brutal. Why wouldn't you run away from that? Why wouldn't you seek to avoid that pain? But because you know it, and you know what's going to happen, it's almost in some ways more comfortable than the uncertainty of something that might be better for you, if that makes sense.
Makes total sense. Because, I mean, when I finally started dating my fiance now, he was like, I don't know, nice to me, complimented me,
Really
and
weird.
it made me feel so awkward. I was so it made me feel weird, and I was like, "Okay,
Well,
you need to
probably
stop."
because in your mind you're like, what is going on here? There's this con. Like there has to be something. Where's the trap door? Right? Like,
Right, and then you're like, "Well, what's wrong with you?"
yeah, man. Like seriously, have you been living in the same world I've been living in? Yeah, right.
And it's sad though, but that is the way that you are pretty much conditioned. And so it takes used to actually having a nice guy, a nice person there. It took a while and I self-sabotage like you would not believe.
Yeah, no, I mean, I absolutely get that same sense, like the way that you know, it's amazing the way trauma works, right? Like it can be healing, it can lead to such growth, and it can lead to some weird or what seem like weird, but in this bizarre way, logical path. Like I've experienced all sorts of trauma and loss, and one of the reactions to it for me has been to run away from intimacy, right? So the more I care about someone and the closer I get to them, the more I want to run away. And then I eventually run away. And I was telling my therapist at one point, I was like, yeah, this just only really happens in dating relationships. And then she started pointing out how it happened in some friendships. And then she's like, and by the way, your mom's dying and you're kind of doing it to her too. And that really caught me because I was like, oh man, I am so conditioned to run away from anything that's good because losing something good would hurt so much more than losing, you know, a not so good person, mediocre person. Then I can kind of walk away and be like, yeah, whatever. But but in doing that, I was robbing myself just sort of like you were in kind of running away and sabotaging your relationship with your fiance. I was robbing myself of so much joy, so much joy. And I think like even talking to you about it right now, I think having these conversations is so important to people like you, me, and the people out there, so many people out there. It's just so important to finding a path to heal and believing that you can heal.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I honestly think by the age of, I don't know, maybe 18 to 21, pretty much everybody has been through some shit. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody carries some kind of trauma. Everybody does. It might not be a crime, but it could be that, you lost somebody that was super close to you and you just never got over it. It could be, it could be that you grew up in the foster system and you feel like you were abandoned. There's just so many different levels of trauma.
Mm.
And I think it's nice when you can hear other people's stories because it kind of humanizes you in a sense. Like there's nothing wrong with me. I'm not damaged goods. I'm
Yeah.
working through my shit.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think also sometimes, like when you're going through it, right? Like going through the ringer with your trauma, you feel kind of like terminally unique. Like in business, there's this thing where they call it imposter syndrome. So like everybody's sitting around the conference table, we're listening to somebody talk, and I'm convinced I'm the only one around the table who doesn't really know what's going on. But come to find out, most of the people around the table have no idea. But I think there's something with trauma where you feel so terminally unique that you are so unbelievably broken and beyond repair. Like, I mean, for me, like, since we talked about relationships, I've always felt in my life that when it comes to romantic relationships, that I'm broken. And I think some of it is being sexually molested as a child. I think some of it is just like my sexual orientation because I'm demisexual, so it's really hard for me to develop sexual attraction to people. I think some of it is later traumas, but I feel like it has caused me at times, not every time, to pick the wrong people and to extend that cycle of trauma. You know, the funny part it was like the two really good relationships I've had in my life since I was a teenager. One was with someone who had known me since we were 14 years old. So there was no bullshitting or running away. So, and then the other one was just somebody who had sort of like pushed their way in and saw right through me immediately. But like if I had a choice, I probably would have not picked either of those paths. I mean, I had a choice. I had agency, but you know what I mean? Like, if I could have hidden myself, I would have.
Right, I get that. I mean, shit. I wish I didn't date the people I did too. But honestly, that's how I think you learn. You learn about yourself. You learn about what you've been through. And what happened to you is 100% why you are that way. Because they took something that didn't belong to them. And you hold that.
That's an
And
interesting
I'm
idea.
sorry that
Like, you
you went
hold
through
on
that.
to it's, I was talking to my brother recently, and we had, I think we'd gone out to dinner and we'd gone to a movie, and he turned to me and he asked me, like, were you sexually abused as a child? And I was like, yes, it's true. And in his mind, he was like, I swear I thought that happened. And I remember that happened. And I was saying to him, right, that it's fundamentally changed us. You know, we're sitting here and we're talking about problems right now in relationships we have with people and not just romantic relationships. And it was like, listen to what we're saying, right? Like everything that we're struggling with, like not everything, but many of those things can be tied back to those moments. And so maybe it's time for us to take some time to heal and learn about those and face. Because for so long in my life, Tiffanie, I was afraid to say the phrase I was sexually molested because it felt so emasculating to me. It felt so unbelievably emasculating to me. And then, life battered me around and I realized actually my sexual molestation probably increased my empathy, my caring for people, my desire to help people, my understanding in situations where my friends had been sexually abused, my advocacy for people. That this thing, yes, it does have to do with a lot of the challenges, but God, does it have to do with some of the most beautiful strengths too. I wish it could have been
100%.
another way, but yeah.
How long did you keep it a secret for?
Interestingly, not very long because, it's timeline as a kid, but I ended up walking out and I don't know whether. So the way it went down essentially is that the person was sexually molesting me and other kids. And I never said anything about it happening to me, but then I walked in on it happening to another kid. And then I told my parents then.
Mm.
So it was seeing it happening to someone else that triggered me.
Good for you because you know it's wrong. That person knows it's wrong.
And I think
Problem
inside I knew it too, but
Oh, of course you did.
you don't want to get the person in trouble. You don't want to, you know what I mean? You don't want to upset your parents, all sorts of things, but there's just something about it happening to someone else.
Especially witnessing it, right?
Yep.
it's the power of getting your voice back. It's about getting your power back. And that is what is so empowering about all of it, because there's people who have probably had it a hell of a lot worse. And you can't live in that space. You can't, because it will eat you alive and nothing good will ever come out of it. So you have to face it. You have to realize what you've been through. And then it's almost like you got to rewire your brain.
Mm. Do you, yeah, so I forget which book it was that, uh, Maya Angelou, yes, the cage, where the line, the cage birds sing. And I always think of that, and I know it has lots of different meanings to people depending on what kind of context that is. But in one, singing is the natural context of birds, right? Even when they're in a cage, even when they're in captivity. And that it's this inherent form of communication. It's this unique voice that we use to interact. And I don't think it's a coincidence that so many metaphors for things like domestic abuse, sexual molestation involve like hands over mouths or even missing and murdered Native American women. Pick your topic. That I think you lose your ability. It's this almost kind of oppression, right? You lose your ability to sing. And I think getting that voice back, I think is super important, but I think it's really hard to do it on our own. So hearing other voices like your voices help people like me build their voices. And I'm sure my voice does the same for other people at times. How did you get on your journey?
Well, funny enough, when I first started out, the podcast was actually Crime Over Cocktails. And I started it with a friend. It was her idea. I never would have done this in my freaking life. Put myself in front of the whole wide world. Well, by episode 4, who would have known we weren't rich? I mean, who knew?
Really? You hadn't become
Yeah,
millionaires by then? Okay.
we did not. Somehow we missed that boat.
Mm.
Well, she quit.
Oh, really?
And yeah. So she did all the back end. And so,
So that's like the editing, the
oh yeah,
social
all that.
media, the okay.
I had no idea. I was the one who found the stories, wrote them, did all that stuff. I came up with the logo, the name. I was the creative side. She was the technical side.
Hmm.
So she just expected that I was going to quit with her.
Mm.
And I said, there ain't no way in hell. I've already done this. I ripped that band aid off. I'm not quitting.
I'm going.
Right. I had to take a break so I could figure out how to do this stuff. A lot of nights I cried, screamed. This is not as easy as it sounds, folks. So it was a learning curve. And once I figured it out, I kept going. And like most women, we all love crime shows. I do not know why. I think I realized though why I kind of got hooked without even knowing how or why. I started seeing myself in some of these stories. And
Like
the more,
hearing about the
yes,
characters and being like, wait a second, I remember that. Yeah.
yeah, like being like, wow, I went through something like that. Oh, that's not normal. It was like an aha moment. Light bulb went on, and it was like, yo, sister, something's wrong. you know? And the more I did all this research, I realized that, these connections, they are what builds us. Like even pedophiles, the thing is, a lot of them were abused themselves, not to give them an out by any means,
Mm.
but that's what they know. And so if they don't know that that is not okay because they were told it was fine and they were shushed, it's really hard for them to be able to turn that off. And so diving deeper into this is when I completely rechanged everything I was doing because I started to realize my own story. I had buried it. I didn't want to acknowledge it. I never even
Mm.
heard of generational abuse. I'd never heard of a narcissist. Financial abuse? Didn't know it was a thing. I've experienced all of this. And it was just so eye opening.
How did you come to the revelation? Was it after you started the the first run of the podcast, or was it like something that came over time? Like,
Well,
'cause
yeah,
I just think a lot of people don't even know some of those concepts exist. Like intergenerational trauma is not something we talk about, and certainly even more so, we don't talk about generational abuse. We don't, you know what I mean? Like,
right.
yeah.
Honestly, one of the times that it really hit me hard is so, for the most part, I try not to say which parent it was, but you know what? It's time to rip that band aid off too. It was my mom.
Mm.
And one day we were talking and she just broke down crying and she was telling me something that my grandmother did to her. And, she was like, it was brutal, Tiffany. It was brutal. And all of a sudden, my eyes could not hold water to save my life. Um, Bawling.
Mm.
And I said, Mom, you did that to me. And she was like, What? I didn't do that. Yeah, you did. And I'd go
What
like,
was it?
So I used to fold towels wrong. Something as
Um,
simple as folding towels. So
in my
if,
house, there's no right way to fold towels.
okay.
You're welcome. You're welcome here.
Well, if she didn't like the way I folded them, she would throw them up in the air. She would whip them. She would yell, like, what's wrong with you? Da da da.
Wow.
And like to this day, if I have to fold a fitted sheet, I get anxiety because I never did it right. Never did it right. And these are the things that stuck with me. And, in seventh grade, she was a single mom. She tried really hard. And I was sleeping on an air mattress for a while. And I finally got a real bed. So, you got to clink the little metal pieces together to make the mattress stay. And I was
Yeah.
having a hard time. Yeah. Like for some
Most
reason, I
kids don't
wasn't
put together their own beds, but okay.
right. So I had a hard time with it. And she came in and she told me I was more trouble than I was worth.
Whoa.
That never left me. Never left me. And she, of course, doesn't remember it, but
What do you think it was about it?
I don't know. My grandmother was pretty brutal. So she was a piece of work, man. She's the only woman I know that when she passed, she left an IOU in her will.
An IOU?
Yes, I swear to God.
No way.
She told my uncle that he owed her money. Shit, you not.
Oh my. Grandma,
Yeah, like
grandma.
I'm saying.
You got a bigger problem. You're dead.
I was just like, who does that?
Go focus on the pearly gates or whatever you do.
Right? But like, my mom always told me the story when she went to get a cookie and she wasn't supposed to get the cookie, but she went for it anyway. She was a kid. My grandmother stabbed her in the hand with a fork.
Whoa.
Yeah, like she was a lovely lady, in her own sense, but she was brutal.
It's
And
interesting you say that about her being a lovely lady. I think that's one of the deceptive things about abuse. I mean, we sometimes talk about this with men and women, but we don't talk about it inside families. Like, I think of people I know, friends, who have some of the most abusive parents emotionally abusive parents or otherwise abusive parents have, they're perfectly lovely people. Like if you're not their kids or somebody close to them, they are unbelievably lovely. Like they will take their shirt off their back to come help you. They're so polite, they're proper, they're fill in the blank. And I think sometimes we like make the mistake of thinking those are signs that someone's not abusive. Like, but they're not.
Right. I mean, it was kind of clear. The priest at my grandmother's funeral uh, gave a very interesting eulogy.
A mixed one. He knew the audience.
Well, he said, I knew if I got something wrong in the Bible, here comes Syl coming down the aisle, shaking her hand, and, she would set him straight. She
Hmm.
did not hold back ever. She was her own breed, man.
Do you think
But
she was the product herself of abuse?
I do, because I asked my mother that, and that's another kind of like aha moment, especially when I saw my mother break down crying when she realized that she had done that to me. She was sobbing uncontrollably, and she was like, I am so sorry. I'm so sorry. I never wanted to do that to you. My mother did that to me, and I always said I wouldn't do it. So without her even realizing what she was doing it. And so as time went on, I asked her, was like, great grandma, like, was she like that? And she's like, oh, yeah, very stern, very to the point. And so that's the day I forgave my mother for my whole freaking life. I did not really like her for a very long time. And it was kind of a relief to me to see her
Hmm.
break down like that, because I always thought in a way she hated me deep down.
And wouldn't
And
have cared that much that you were hurt.
yes. And it kind of was like, wow, she didn't do these things intentionally. I
Because
just
she
thought,
hated you.
yeah, right.
She did the best she could with the tools that she had. And those were the
Exactly.
tools she had. Yeah.
Yep.
That must have been a momentous moment for you. How long ago was that?
You ready for this? About maybe 2 years ago.
Oh, so it's not too not too long. It must have been awesome for you though to recognize that. Like, did you when you were younger? Did you internalize this? Like, make this a matter of your self worth?
Of course. She told me I was pretty much worthless, and I believed that. And then I dated men who told me I was worthless. I had a best friend who told me I was worthless. So the pattern was always there. So of course, you're going to start to believe it.
You said the thing before about how you felt that some of it was that you attracted people who were like that and who were abusive. Tell me about that. Like what?
Without even realizing it. It's just people who would put you down constantly. You know, one ex used to tell me I was ugly, fat, and gross. I used to have another
Mm.
one that told me I was stupid and, just be a complete freaking jerk. I had friends that would tell me that, you're a horrible mom, you're ugly, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that. I actually, so one girl, I wanted to go into radio. And she told me, right, that you don't have the personality for radio. Well, look at me now, bitch.
What in the
You know?
world did she mean? Do
Right.
you think it was just to beat you down, or do you think like you were just attracting people who needed to pummel people?
Yeah. I mean, I think obviously these people have their own demons, because you don't put people down unless you feel a type of way about yourself. Like all these online trolls and all these haters out there. You know why you're a hater? Because you hate yourself. It's not me that
Mm,
you hate. You hate yourself. You hate something about your own life. So putting me down makes you feel better. And that's just a coward.
yeah. Like, one of the interesting things for me, like in just working with clients, working with my friends, like some of the people who get beat up the most are like also some of the nicest people. Like, I mean, they're like loving, they're caring, they're supportive. And it's always kind of like baffled me by how loving, caring, supportive people attract people who punch them in the face. Do you know what I mean? Like metaphorically or literally. And
Yes,
it just feels like it's so unfair.
it
Like, don't they
is.
deserve people who are just like them? Like loving, caring, supportive? Like, it's just so unfair.
I feel like these people can smell your aura a mile away.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, like you could be in a bar, right? We're going to say there's 100 people in this bar. You are the only one in the whole bar who's really been through some serious shit. Somehow they can smell you,
Hmm.
and now you are their next target. I don't know how they do it. I really don't. It's amazing. Like
Oh
they're
no, I honestly think that there's some real data behind what you're talking about. Like I used to call it the girl who hands you the napkin when you spill your drink. And it's that like they're picking up on people's anxiety, that they're loyal, that they're supportive, that they're maybe a little afraid, right? And may need to be protected. And they're honing in on that like laser because it's viewed as something I can control. I think that there's like research around this actually that certain people have a radar for those kinds of weaknesses or challenges.
for sure. They can sense it. I don't know if it's because you keep your head down low. Maybe you fidget. Maybe I don't know what it is, but they can pick up on it. And then before you know it, you're dating this person and you're in for one hell of a ride.
When did you realize about your dating relationships that they were like mirroring some of the abuse in other parts of your life?
It's been a few years now. I didn't realize the generational part for, like I said, till just a couple years ago when I actually saw the reaction from my mom. But with dating, I realized I kept finding the same kind of people and I couldn't understand it. Like their abuse was different. One
Hmm.
was physical and sexual and mental, and the other one was just all psychological. And
Hmm.
cheated constantly, lied constantly, and was up my ass like I was doing something wrong. So, you know, that's when I was like, what is going on? Like, what am I doing wrong here? And it all just started coming together. I mean, I'd say within the last 5 years, I have grown so much. I would think to some people, I might even be like almost unrecognizable inside.
Mm. What led you to decide to tell your story? Like how do you, because it's one thing to like come up with revelations about yourself, right? Like, I think of my trauma as like, there's some socially acceptable traumas. I was a reporter. I saw lots of dead bodies. It really impacted me. That's socially acceptable to talk about. I was sexually abused, less socially acceptable to talk about. Domestic violence, totally not socially acceptable to talk about. By comparison, I mean, or it's not polite dinner conversation. But I think there's a connection, right, between the more socially acceptable and the least. I actually think the things that are less socially acceptable to talk about are the ones that require less vulnerability in a society that discourages vulnerability because the people who are discouraging it are so afraid of being vulnerable themselves. And so I guess this is a long way of sort of saying that, like, I think it takes a lot of courage to be vulnerable. So led you to decide to tell your story?
Because I want other people to realize that you're not alone. There wasn't anything wrong with you. What these people were saying about you is not true. What they tried to hold you back, do not let them. You know, both of them were financially abusive to me. I wasn't even allowed to work. And so they want to keep you in this bubble, and you cannot allow that. You have to spread your wings. And I got tired of living in that space. And I got tired of always thinking that they were right, because they weren't. They were far from it. And the more that I saw all these shows and everything, I was like, you know what? It was also time for me to face it, because, like I said, I didn't put a name to all this stuff for a very long time. The more things are coming out, gaslighting, like that was not a thing, you know? Like these terms that we have now did not exist when this happened to me. I was in my 20s and 30s. They did not exist. So the fact that we are now having these conversations are so important. And you have to be honest with yourself if you want to grow. And I'm going to let you know one thing, Jason, is some of the stuff that I'm actually sharing tonight is the first time that I'm sharing it. I have shared some of it, but not as much detail. So actually,
I appreciate it.
yeah, it kind of makes me feel good.
Good, good, because that's the way it should be. I I have this. So my mom died in October of last year, and she's amazing. I would talk for hours about her. I was so fucking lucky. I was so unbelievably lucky to have a mom. And my ex partner, and we're best friends. We split it. Five of us did the eulogy. Me, my brother, one of my mom's closest friends, a cousin that was like a daughter to my mom, and my former partner. And she was bawling, my former partner was, afterwards. And she came up to me and she said that it's something I never heard her say. And like I said, we've known each other since we were 14. She said, "Your mom taught me how to be a mom."
Mm.
And she is so good to her boys. She's such an amazing mom. And I'm just thinking about what you're saying, right? Like maybe she didn't have the model for a mom, but some woman like my mom came into her life and gave her another way, not just unintentionally, just by being herself. And, it's funny because I had always thought during our relationship, like one of the things that I gave her was love that she didn't get or grow up with or wasn't surrounded by. And so, long way of saying, my mom dies. I have this friend, this relatively new friend, and she noticed I had disappeared, right? Like, and she reached out and 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 one of the things, because I'm like a firm believer in like don't do anything crazy in the first year after your mom dies. But one of the things that's really so like no dating, no anything like that. But it opened up this great window because I'm for someone like my partner, my ex-partner, who got that good thing for my mom, I can carry that on with my mom. With my new friend who's gone through lots of difficult things, I can share the love that she didn't get from other people with the kids who are in my life, like my nieces and nephews. I can bring some of that love that she had. And one of the things I am reminded by over and over again, how many of my mom's former students whose lives were changed by her. And by just being there, you were another model other than the people that that person had in their life. So, like, when I hear your voice and I hear you talking about like race or LGBTQ issues or domestic violence or be vulnerable like you are now, like to someone somewhere out there, like they could be across the ocean, they could be here, you're that voice that's giving them something that they didn't have. And I think
That's
there's
what I
something
love about
awesome.
this.
Yeah.
Yes.
There's something.
Well, I hope you know, Jason, your mother is so proud of you.
It's very funny. A month before she died, she was in the hospital and she had gotten out in between. And we were having this conversation about like, uh, do we do extraordinary care? And she pulled us all around the bed and forced us to answer, even if we didn't want to. And then when we were done talking, she says, "Hey, since we all agree, there'll be no extraordinary care." Right. And then out of nowhere, so the scene is my sister-in-law, my brother, my dad, and I. She grabs my hand and she says, "Jason, I love you and I'm proud of you and you've done really, really well." And it was apropos of nothing. I didn't ask a question. She wasn't just spreading it around the room, but she like knew that even though my mom did nothing in her life that ever made me think she wasn't proud of me, that she knew I needed to hear that. So I appreciate that. But I think I want to carry that legacy on by being able to be that, going back to our cage bird singing, to be that voice, like your voice, like her voice.
The more everybody can speak up, own your truth, you can move past your past. It's possible to have a fantastic life, even if you've been through some horrible things. That does not define you.
Mm.
You are not your trauma. You didn't ask to be abused. It happened. You learn from it. You grow. Every day you grow. Like, this is not a one stop shop. Like, this is a forever journey. You're going to have bad days. That's
I,
okay. It's called
I would,
life.
and I think as you embrace it, right? Like what I've learned is that my trauma is the best of me. It made everything I love about me right now. Yeah. Like I think without my trauma, I probably would have been like pretty arrogant, narcissistic. Like I am full of myself. I do think I'm really smart and funny and all that stuff. I think I would have been a horrible human being. I
No,
really
you
do.
wouldn't. No.
Yeah, no, no, no. Ask them. You should ask them. No, and I definitely don't wish trauma on anyone, but I will say, how about this? The growth that came from it has been probably a gift to at least my small section of the world.
Well, I am honored that I am part of your circle. And I think that you are freaking amazing. So,
Oh. Well, welcome. Here's a ticket. I was going to ask you just one thing about podcasting. I was having this cool conversation. I was being interviewed earlier today on a new sort of YouTube channel by a guy I really like named Mike Early, and it's just legal history podcast. And one of the questions that he asked me was, are podcasters in the true crime space, like, are they journalists or they whatever? And I was like, well, I think they're like four big buckets you can put them in with a little bit of crossover between the buckets. You have people who are doing it for entertainment. You have people who are journalists, right? They're investigating something or they're reporting the news. You have analytical podcasts, like people who are analyzing. They're not necessarily doing their own reporting, but they're analyzing things and providing commentary. And then you have advocacy, right? And like all of those can be educational. So I'll say each of those can, like even the entertainment ones can be educational. But one of the things I've noticed is there is a small but new crop of podcasts in my mind that are in this true crime space. And they are, they're advocating for a better way of living, but there's something like slightly different in the sense that they're not like the end goal. And I feel this way about your podcast is that the end goal is that people will walk away with a little bit more safety, a little bit more health, a little bit more love. And I'm just wondering whether you think this is, I feel like it's unique in the space. And do you feel like this is something that we should or we are going to see more of?
Absolutely. I've already seen, ever since I have started my journey, I've already seen like more of this starting to pop up, because these are stories that they make people uncomfortable, but they're stories that need and deserve to be told, because this is real life. This happens. It happens in every country, to every color, to every gender, it does not matter. Abuse does not discriminate. And it's just so important that we realize it and we start the process. You can't stay stagnant. It's all about your why, you know?
And there's a cost, right? Like, yes, very much about the why. There's a cost to not doing it. And so like I just think about like the example that you gave of those relationships, or me in my pulling away. Like, I'll give you a real world one for me too. On top of that is like, because I was abused, I think that there was a real risk of me becoming an abuser if I didn't deal with my trauma, because I think, like, yes, to some extent it's what you know, right? And I have to give it to my parents. They handled it deftly. Like, their response was magical in my mind. They believe that their response was not adequate, but they are absolutely wrong, at least in this little child's eyes. But the I think, like, I got on that victim, rescuer, perpetrator triangle, right? Like, I could have been a rescuer and like given my whole like life to other people and not taking care of myself. I could have become a permanent victim, right? Like, constantly getting into victim situations. And I could have become a perpetrator, because I think the thing about being a perpetrator, a lot of the people that I've worked with, when I think of pedophilia or other things, or I guess sexual abuse, not so much pedophilia, but sexual abuse, a lot of them are actually self-justifying what happened to them. Like, if I can really fall in love with this person and do this thing, then what happened to me isn't as bad because it's different and it's real. And I'm like, if I hadn't dealt with it, if I hadn't had parents I could talk openly about it with, if I hadn't like met the girls that I met in high school who were my friends who had also gone through abuse and opened up to me about their abuse, I don't know where on that triangle I would have landed. And instead, I found a way in the middle. So, like, I look at those people who are constant victims or who are just rescuing everyone and not taking care of themselves, and those perpetrators, and I see me, because I could have been any of them.
Yeah, but you chose the better good.
And I was lucky. you know, I had people, I had voices. Going back to our point about voices, I had voices that showed me another way. Like, and that's just pure gift, like luck. There's nothing about me that deserves it more than, someone else.
Yeah, but you learned how to work through it and you knew what you didn't want to be. That is so important in itself. You have to realize where you could have gone, but you didn't.
And to that's to your point about the why, like, right, understanding. Talk to me more about that, the understanding your why.
You have to know your why, because even earlier, like I said, podcasting is not as easy as everyone thinks it is. They're like, oh, it takes 20 minutes and it's this, and this. No, 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 no. We
I
have to
wish.
pay, right? We have to pay to do this in some sense, some way or form. And
Mentally, emotionally,
oh,
and
God,
also financially, literally cash.
absolutely. And it's not an easy thing to do. And so if you do not really have a why, you're never going to make it, because it's not it's not easy. Going to Apple and click and play, that's easy. But to actually do this, it takes a lot. It really does. And something has to keep you going. there's a reason why you put up with the craziness, because you know you're making a difference. You know that you're also healing in a sense. Like almost every guest that I have on my show, I learn something more about myself.
Mm,
And
couldn't agree
it's
more.
empowering. Yes. Like I'm growing with my audience. And that is so powerful. And I wouldn't want it any other way.
I wouldn't give up these conversations for anything in the world, because like, even, you were saying earlier that there's things that you shared you never shared. Like, there are definitely things in this conversation I don't think I've shared with people. And it's this opportunity for like growth. And we talk about the idea of therapy, that you're behind, like with the therapist, you're having therapy. But I think there are ways to find therapy in your life just through conversations, just through interactions, through learning and growing with people, whether you're the podcaster or the listener or the person who's hanging out with their friend. Or I was going to just, do you find it difficult or hard to be public and vulnerable about these topics? And also emotionally, like, what does it feel like to go into these deep places with your guests?
There are definitely some guests that affected me differently, just hearing what they had been through. And because my personality, like I cry at commercials, okay? Because I put myself in that commercial and it's like I'm that person. So when I have somebody telling me some of this horrendous stuff, I can't not get touched by it, and to think of where they are now. Wow, that's where you grew from. It's huge. And I just think we all really have to be strong. And again, these are conversations that we have to have because somebody else is going through the same thing. You can't be afraid to tell these things. Now, being on video is one thing I've struggled with this whole time on podcasting. And oh my gosh, I hate
I
it.
always joke, I always joke to people that like, when I'm on video, it's like a different thing. And they're like, how are your episodes different? I'm like, well, because during the middle of my normal episodes, I will lay my head on the desk and sometimes cry. I will lean into the back of my chair so far. I'm like, it's just not video appropriate.
Right. I'm always worried about my face. I'm very animated. And so I don't want to take away from my guest. Like when I talk with my guests, we are for the most part face to face in that sense. But I don't really publish it that way, except for, I mean, now, shout out to Casey if he listens to this. He's been helping me with that. Oh my God. I think he is, actually, he's part of our network now, but, he has the deluxe edition network. And so he's really good at making shorts and
Oh,
everything. And
cool.
so he's handling that for me. But can I tell you the amount of anxiety that went through me knowing that he did this? But at the same time, I mean, the results are already showing. People want to see the vulnerability.
Hmm.
They want to know that you're not, blowing smoke up their butt. Like people really want that connection. And that's what we're all here for. So I don't think I can ever put a full episode like on video out just because some of the topics are, some of them are very hard.
Hmm.
Very hard. Some of them stay with me. There's a few that have stayed with me, but kudos for them for sharing it. And it's the only way that we're all going to grow. So,
What have some of the most impactful ones been for you?
oh, I mean, I've had a few make me cry. One, I tried to hide it as much as I could. But she was 9 years old, and she woke up to three men, and they ended up taking turns with her. And in the middle of it, she looked over and watched her mother and her mother's best friend were in the corner watching.
Oh.
They were getting free drugs. That really just struck me. Like, just to think that a mother could do that. Like, that's still right now, it gives me goosebumps in a sense, because my heart goes out to her so much. But you should see what she's done with her life. She's amazing, and she's overcome it. And that's just the beauty of so many of these. I had another girl on my show who lost her baby because of the boyfriend. He made her lose it. And,
Just
she literally sat and cried on my podcast. And it breaks your heart to know that somebody went through that. And then, just to even make it even worse, he ended up naming his first child the name that they were going to name that child, with another woman. Yeah, it's difficult conversations, but they're conversations that need to be talked about.
do you have any thoughts, or have you noticed any trends between or related to the people who are able to heal and those who struggle?
Yeah, a lot of them have definitely started their own healing journey. Most of them now either they do holistic for the most part, but it's hypnotherapy, Reiki, um, EFT,
EMDR.
RTT. Oh yeah, all of it. They were able to find something that they loved and identified with. And now they use that passion to help other people. And I think that's the most beautiful thing about all of this, because, yeah, these come from very hard, dark times.
Hmm.
But the thing is, we will not allow ourselves to live there. We have forced ourselves into the light, and you can never go back to the darkness. You have to keep pushing forward. You have
You know,
to.
that you got me thinking about something that I haven't thought about in a long time, because, I was a little kid, and my mother is the only mother. I've known her as her happy, wonderful, loving person self, and my dad, he's such a good guy too. But I think about both of them. And my father, when he was in college, he was home from college, their house got on fire, and his nieces were in the bedroom that he was supposed to sleep in. And
Mm.
everyone else got out of the house except for them. My uncle nearly burnt himself to death trying to break back into the house and save them. And that family has been through so many tragedies. Like, my uncle lost his only child in a car accident. Like, you can pick. There's been so much trauma in that family. And it also shaped who my dad is, the good person he is today. And then my mom, who people rarely know this about it, but she experienced sexual abuse and mental health crises and all these things I never saw, that I only found out about because she shared after I shared with her, and that it was relatable. And, as you're talking about these people where so much good and growth has come out of it, I'm missing the fact that the two most important people in my life who helped shape me, you know, went through things like that. And it's almost like the reverse of generational abuse, right? They've like taken it and they've turned it around into something good that they passed on to their children. Hopefully we will pass on to our children, like the reverse of it, if that makes sense. Is that something
I
you
am,
hope for?
oh, I am the one who broke the cycle.
Yeah.
I
You
s-
remember?
I have my son is 18 years old, and there were times where I could see I was about to either say something that, words hurt. And I get it, they're only words. My mother, she never laid a hand on me, but it was the
Right.
emotional scars. So
Whoever came
I
up with that line, "Sticks and stones may hurt your bones, but words will never hurt you," is
hurt
dead
me,
wrong. Dead wrong. Dead
right?
wrong.
Right? Liar.
Or just a really big optimist.
Right. Well, I saw myself going in that direction. And I said, absolutely not. It stops here. It stops now. And I do everything in my power to make sure that I do not do that to him. I tell him I love him every day. And he's always like, yeah, yeah, yeah. Like, I don't care. You're going to know. I love you. You were wanted. Da 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 da. Like you are worth it to me. Just because we can't keep the cycle going. I
Yeah.
mean,
And why
half of
miss
my
an
family.
opportunity to tell
Right.
somebody you love that you love them?
Yeah.
You were
Life's
saying half of
short.
your family?
Well, yeah. I mean, my grandmother had 4 kids. And so they're all fucked up, you know? Like, so in their own ways. So you have to be the one to stand up, notice it, see it, and change it. Be the change.
Hmm. One of the things, like, as somebody who does interviews, like, I think of myself as just like a vessel, right, for other people's stories, a facilitator, right, of other stories. But, the more people make comments, I realize I play an active role in it. One of the things I've been thinking about is, like, what is, I'm going to throw this one to you. But, like, what do you think your responsibility it is when it comes to helping people tell their stories?
To not judge, to listen. You cannot judge somebody that you did not walk in their shoes. So nowadays, like if I hear a story about somebody who did something horrible, instead of being like, wow, they're a monster, da 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 da, I think, I wonder what happened to them. How did they get there?
Yeah, and I think the same thing even happens to victims. I had a friend I was talking to recently who's been in, like, domestic violence and relationships, and she was talking about it, and she was telling each of the stories, and at the end of it she would say a comment, and I don't, like, maybe half jokingly, about how dumb she was that she didn't learn the lesson each time. And I thought to myself, like, man, you are judging yourself a little bit too much. Like, you were just a human. Like, you were just a kid. You were just, like, and I guess the point, I feel like we're really quick to judge both perpetrators and victims without first asking that question that you're getting at, is like, how did you get here? Like, what was your path? What was your journey? Because I think, like, there's this Longfellow quote, and I'm going to butcher it, but it goes something like, if you could see within the secret histories of every man's heart, you'd see such sadness and sorrow to disarm all hostility. And I think when I really get to know people, there's a little bit of truth to that.
It's a lot of truth to that. Most people don't wake up one day and be like, you know what? I think today I want to shoot up a school. No, these people have either dealt with either bullying or they were abused. I mean, it could go down the list. They were dirt poor, and there's just so many different levels. So it's hard to just say, well, they're a monster. I mean, look at half of the serial killers, okay? They were all either molested, neglected, or abused. damn near almost all of them. There's just a very few that may not fit that mold. So, for the most part, people do not just wake up and decide to do these things. It's a progression. And a lot of times it starts out with fantasies. And once you start having these fantasies, that's when you really, you need to go and talk to somebody so you can start to rewire it. But that is something that I've really learned throughout all the research that I've been doing.
Hmm. Yeah,
It's, yeah,
people think that like people like serial killers can't change or fantasies, and I'm like, you underestimate the power of neuroplasticity. You can rewire your brain in ways you can't imagine.
right. I mean, Kemper, he tried to get help numerous times. They turned him away.
That's Ed
Like
Kemper. He was the
the cop.
California serial
Well, he
killer?
was the guy who's too tall to be a
Oh,
police officer.
yes, he's the one that's in the TV show Mindhunter, the one that John Douglas's character and his partner are interviewing all the time. Yeah, Kemper. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few of them that have
I didn't know he
literally,
tried to get help
yes,
because he
he told
fantasized about
people.
like is he the one who like cut his mom's head off and then something or other with it? I forget what he did
Had
with her
sex with
head.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, he had sex with her head. The but he was having fantasies about that before, but I didn't realize he had tried to get help.
Yep. He went and asked for help, and they pretty much said, "You're fine. Just, you know, don't do it." And I can't think, I want to say there was even another one that said, "Listen," they were already in jail and said, "Listen, if you let me out, I'm going to do it again." They wanted to stay in prison. And they were like, "Nope, you're good. You're good to go." And then they get out and they reoffend. It's a sickness. They need the help. His mother, well, Kemper, was super abusive to him.
Right. Yes.
Yes.
And I
Even
and I and I think the abuse, actually, to your point about generational trauma, as I recall, the abuse is what actually set the fantasies in motion, like stopping the
yes,
abuse. Yeah.
he hated his mother because of what she did. And then a lot of them internalize it and then they hate all women. And that's how that begins. Like, what was it? Jerry Barros, one of those. He was the shoe guy. He loved him some shoes. He would tackle women and steal their shoes.
Really?
Yes. But then the mother caught him one day in shoes, like high heels that he had stolen.
Um,
And she literally like just put him down 100 ways. And after that, he started killing people. It's just, these are cries for help, and people need to listen, especially if somebody tells you, "I need help." You have to listen.
why do you think like we choose to ignore those parts of perpetrator stories?
Back then, people didn't talk about this stuff. I mean, we're talking back in the 60s, 70s, 80s. I would say, like, the whole mental health, the Me Too, all of this stuff within the last 10 to 15 years has taken a huge turn. I mean, back in the day, we used to call them shrinks. And you're going to go to a shrink and you're going to lay on a
Hmm.
couch and you're going to tell them about your life. So nobody wanted to do it
Sounds
because,
frightening.
right, now you're labeled as a crazy person. And it's not the truth at all. It just means that you want to get better. You want to work on what is not working.
Mm. What do you see as sort of like maybe a path to a better world with like less abuse and violence, less cycles of abuse, and like what
Self-reflection.
yeah.
You need to understand where you came from, what you're capable of, and realize that it is fixable. Like, I actually started a nonprofit called the Crime Connection. And I want to start talking with new mothers, pregnant mothers, or parents, really. I mean, it goes both ways, but if you were a product of abuse, so you do not repeat it. I think if children are grown up in a more loving atmosphere, we will have less destruction, because almost every person, all the people who shoot up the schools, the serial killers, the abusers, that is something that they have carried with them their whole lives. And eventually they lash out. So if we can cut that down, I understand, like, nobody's ever going to be perfect. If you make $8 an hour, you're probably going through some shit if you have like 6 kids. So times are tough, but you have to realize what you say can last a lifetime. What you do can last a lifetime. And the next thing you know, your kid's going to prison because they just shot up a mall or something.
Mm.
It can be preventable, at least to a point. Now, there are just evil people out there, but for the most part, these all stem from somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah. I always wonder about evil, whether it's just that we haven't figured out what the thing was.
I think it goes
I
both ways.
yeah. I So Toni Morrison wrote this novel, The Bluest Eye. And the phrase "the bluest eye" in the novel, it actually has to do with it's a symbol for whiteness in it, and the ultimate desire of the central character, due to her she's black and she's grown up in a society that values whiteness, right, as the supreme positive characteristic. It's the bluest eye. And I always think of that sometimes, like when I'm thinking about victims, like we all have our like little bluest eye, right? Like we look at what's happened to us, we look at our imperfections, and we wish we were that other person. And what I found over time as I've looked at the bluest eyes in my life is, oh no, they're just like me. And they're just like me. And I think one of the things for me is like breaking down this myth that suffering isn't universal, that we all suffer. Like that is not just a part of life, it is a instrumental part of life and growth. And I just wonder that if we could look at everyone and say, everyone suffers, that a lot of those fights, those battles, that judgmentalness that you're talking about, if we could accept that we all have that bluest eye or don't, that there would be so many more bridges between us on the way to that path. But let me give you a chance to share like any closing thoughts you want to, or any message you want to give people.
I would like to say that hurt people hurt people. So it's time that we start to heal the hurt. And it's time that we come up with different coping mechanisms from when we're mad, we're angry, we're frustrated, we're sad, that we're not taking it out on people that don't deserve it. A child who is 6 years old cannot help you because you cannot pay the light bill. So do not take it out on a child. I know that is so much easier said than done because we're humans. Our emotions sometimes fly off. But it's just to sit and reflect. Sit with your thoughts before reacting. I've learned to put myself in timeout. Grown ass
Same
timeout.
here. Back when you could take, back when you could take batteries out of cell phones, I would just rip the battery out of the back of my phone and be like, I'm in timeout.
Yeah. I mean, anytime I felt like I was going to be that person to my child, I shut myself in my room and I was not allowed out until I was a better person, because it's just not fair. And this stuff carries a lifetime. So, anyone who's listening and you're like, oh crap, I do these things, please just remember that yes, our anger, our frustration, it gets the best of us sometimes, but you have to realize the impact that it has on other people's lives. And hurt
Yeah.
people definitely hurt people.
And you believe like in that idea that people can rewire? Because, one of the things that like I say to myself, because, well, needless to say, my relationship with emotions is very complicated. Sometimes I have them, sometimes they're out of control, sometimes they're whatever. But one of the things that I like, there's this concept called opposite action. And I will tell myself, like, okay, you're angry. So instead of lashing out, like calmly talk about my feelings or walk away. Okay, I'm anxious. Like instead of avoiding it, run to it. I feel shame. Okay, I feel shame. I'm going to raise my head now. I'm afraid, like I'm going to move toward. I feel disgust and I'm going to face it, right? So I've learned to turn my secondary emotions, my negative emotions into positives by doing the opposite action. And I think there's like a real truth to that idea that for people who think there's no hope for them to change, that you just have to do the hard work of rewiring. Do you believe that there's a
100%.
chance? Okay.
100%. If you do the work, you put in the work. I think honestly, people do not want to face what they need to face. That frightens them. But what you're doing is more harm than good, not only to yourself, but other people around you. So it is so important to put in the work to become that person that you want to be. Stop being afraid. Stop being angry. It's going to take time. You're not going to wake up one day and be like, ha, look at me, I'm healed. No, it's a process. It's a long, lifelong process. But it is so worth it when you can hold your head up high and realize that you do have worth, that you are somebody who belongs in this society, and that everything that happens is not permanent, temporary. Some of this stuff is, give it a week, it's gone. Instead of just living in that moment, you have to give yourself the chance to breathe and to realize that there's so much ahead of you and so much on the other side. Just put in the work. You have to.
Yeah. Now, I may not believe in the words will never hurt you, but I do believe in all wounds heal with time. That part I believe is true. Well, Tiffanie, I just want to thank you for coming on and sharing and being so open. And it's nice to have someone to be vulnerable with.
Well, thank you for having me.
If you want to join us for more discussions with us and our other listeners, we can be found on most social media platforms, including a listener-run Facebook group called the Silver Linings Fireside Chat. For deeper conversations with our guests and live conversations with other listeners, you can join us at our Patreon at www.patreon.com/The Silver Linings Handbook. This is Jason Blair, and this is the Silver Linings Handbook podcast. We'll see you all again next week.